The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty train platform as Emma clutched her worn leather suitcase with trembling hands. She had been waiting for 3 hours, watching as train after train pulled into Millfield Station, passengers stepping off to embrace waiting loved ones. But nobody came for her. The telegram in her coat pocket felt heavier with each passing minute. She pulled it out again, reading the faded words that had brought her across 3 states to this small Colorado town. Come immediately. Wedding planned. Your loving fiancé, Robert. The paper was dated 6 weeks ago, and Emma had traveled for days to reach this remote depot, spending her last savings on train tickets and meals along the way. Station Master Henderson approached her for the 3rd time that morning, his weathered face showing genuine concern. Miss, are you certain someone is coming for you? The next eastbound train doesn't arrive until tomorrow evening. Emma straightened her shoulders, trying to maintain dignity despite the growing knot of fear in her stomach. He'll come. Perhaps he's been delayed with ranch business. But even as she spoke the words, doubt crept into her voice like winter whined through broken shutters. The depot began to empty as the afternoon train departed, leaving behind only the echo of steel wheels on tracks and Emma's quiet breathing. She had nowhere else to go. Her family farm back in Missouri had been sold to pay debts after her father's death. Her mother had passed the previous winter, and her only sister lived in California with a husband who made it clear Emma wasn't welcome in their home. Robert had been her hope, her future. They had corresponded for 8 months after meeting through a mutual friend's letter of introduction. His letters painted pictures of a successful cattle ranch, a comfortable house with room for a family, and a man eager to share his life with a good woman. Emma had fallen in love with his words, his promises, his dreams that matched her own desperate need for belonging. As shadows grew longer, Emma realized she needed to find shelter for the night. She approached Henderson again, this time with less pride and more desperation. Sir, might you know of a boarding house or hotel where a lady could stay safely? Henderson removed his cap, scratching his graying hair. There's Mrs. Murphy's place about a mile down Main Street. But I should warn you, it's not exactly what you'd call refined. Mostly serves railroad workers and cowboys passing through. Costs $2 a night for a clean room and meals. Emma's heart sank. She had exact 3 weeks passed before Emma saw him for the first time. She was sweeping the front steps of Peterson's store when a group of cowboys rode into town, their horses dusty from long travel and their faces weathered by sun and wind. Most of them headed directly to the saloon, but one remained behind to water his horse at the trough near the general store. Emma noticed him because he was different from the usual ranch hands who passed through Millfield. While other cowboys were loud and rough, this one moved with quiet purpose. His clothes were well-maintained despite obvious hard use, and he handled his horse with gentle authority that spoke of genuine partnership rather than mere dominance. Emma's hands trembled as she folded her few possessions into her battered suitcase for the 2nd time since arriving in Millfield. This time, however, she wasn't fleeing in desperation but moving toward possibility. Jake had arrived at dawn as promised, leading a gentle mare for her to ride, and bringing news that Mr. Wheeler was eager to meet her. Peterson had been predictably unpleasant about her departure, complaining that she was leaving him in a difficult position despite giving him 3 days' notice. Emma endured his complaints without argument, knowing that nothing she said would satisfy him, and that her future lay beyond his cramped store and bitter disposition. You'll be back, he called after her as she carried her suitcase to where Jake waited. Ranch life isn't suited for delicate ladies from back east. You'll see. Emma didn't dignify his prediction with a response. She had learned that Peterson enjoyed making others feel small and uncertain, and she refused to give him that satisfaction any longer. Jake helped her mount the mare with patient instruction, noting her obvious inexperience with horses. Daisy here is steady and reliable, he assured her. She'll take good care of you on the ride out. The journey to Circle M Ranch took them through some of the most beautiful country Emma had ever seen. Rolling hills covered with golden grass stretched toward distant mountains that rose like purple walls against the sky. Jake pointed out landmarks and explained the geography, his obvious love for this land evident in every word. Been working ranches since I was 14, he told her as they paused to rest the horses near a clear stream. Never found anything that suited me better than this life. Emma watched him water the horses with practiced efficiency, noting how completely at home he seemed in this vast wilderness. Don't you ever feel isolated out here? So far from civilization? Jake considered the question seriously. I suppose it depends on what you call civilization. Seems to me there's more honest living in ranch country than in most towns I've visited. People here tend to be straightforward about their intentions. Emma thought about her experiences in Millfield and had to agree. The complexity and deception that had brought her west seemed less likely in this open country where survival depended on cooperation and reliability. Circle M Ranch exceeded Emma's expectations in every way. The main house was a solid two-story structure built from local timber and stone, surrounded by well-maintained outbuildings and corrals. Gardens showed evidence of careful tending, though they clearly needed a woman's touch to reach their full potential. Mr. Wheeler proved to be a soft-spoken man in his early 40s, with graying hair and kind eyes that held deep sadness. He greeted Emma with genuine warmth and introduced her to his children, 8-year-old Sarah and 6-year-old Tommy, who had been in the care of various ranch hands since their mother's death. The children were polite but reserved, clearly uncertain about this new woman in their home. Emma understood their caution and made no attempt to force friendship, instead focusing on demonstrating her competence and reliability. The position involves managing the household, cooking for the family and ranch hands, some basic teaching for the children, and general domestic supervision, Wheeler explained as he showed her through the house. The wages are $40 monthly, with room and board provided. You'd have your own quarters upstairs and complete authority over household matters. Emma could barely contain her excitement. $40 monthly was more than she had dared hope for, and the house was more comfortable than anywhere she had lived since leaving Missouri. But she forced herself to ask practical questions about expectations and responsibilities, wanting to ensure she could meet Wheeler's needs. I should mention, Wheeler added as they concluded the tour, that Jake Morrison speaks very highly of your character. His recommendation carries considerable weight with me. Jake's judgment about people is rarely wrong. Emma glanced toward the window where she could see Jake talking with other ranch hands, clearly respected among the men who worked there. His support meant more than she had realized, and she felt a surge of gratitude for his kindness. When would you need me to begin? She asked. Immediately, if you're willing. The children need stability, and, frankly, I'm struggling to manage everything alone. Emma accepted on the spot, and Wheeler's relief was obvious. That evening, she found herself cooking dinner for 12 people in a well-equipped kitchen, with Sarah and Tommy cautiously offering to help. The meal was simple but substantial, and the obvious appreciation of the ranch hands for decent food made her feel useful for the first time since arriving in Colorado. After dinner, Jake approached her as she cleaned dishes. How are you settling in? Very well, Mr. Wheeler, and the children are lovely, and this house feels more like home than anywhere I've lived in months. Jake nodded approvingly. Marcus is a good man who's had a hard time since losing his wife. The children need someone who cares about them, not just another hired hand trying to manage household duties. Emma looked toward the parlor where Wheeler was reading to his children by lamplight. They seem like a wonderful family. I hope I can help them heal. I think you can, Jake said quietly. You have a kind heart, and that's what they need most right now. Over the following weeks, Emma threw herself into her new responsibilities with energy and determination. She organized the household, established routines that gave the children security, and began teaching them basic reading and arithmetic skills their mother had started before her death. The ranch hands quickly learned to appreciate her cooking, and she found satisfaction in providing hearty meals for hardworking men. Jake was a frequent presence at the ranch, as Wheeler relied on his expertise with cattle and land management. Emma looked forward to these visits, enjoying their conversations about ranch life, books they had both read, and their different experiences growing up. Gradually, Sarah and Tommy began to trust her, sharing stories about their mother and their fears about the future. Emma listened patiently and offered comfort without trying to replace the woman they had lost. Instead, she focused on creating new traditions and experiences that honored their mother's memory while helping them move forward. One evening in late autumn, as Emma was putting the children to bed, Sarah asked her a question that caught her completely off guard. "Miss Carter, are you going to marry Papa and become our new mother?" Emma's heart raced as she considered how to respond. She had grown genuinely fond of Marcus Wheeler and felt deep affection for his children, but she had carefully avoided thinking about their relationship in romantic terms. Wheeler had been nothing but proper and respectful, never suggesting anything beyond their employer-employee arrangement. "Your papa and I haven't discussed anything like that," Emma answered honestly. "I'm here to help your family, and I care about all of you very much. But marriage is something that would require many conversations between adults." Sarah seemed satisfied with this answer, but Emma lay awake that night considering possibilities she had been too afraid to examine. Was she developing feelings for Marcus Wheeler? Could this arrangement ever become something more personal and permanent? Her questions were answered unexpectedly the next week when Jake arrived with troubling news. He had been in town and learned that Tom Bradley, the cowboy he had confronted months earlier, had been asking questions about Emma and making crude comments about her living situation at the ranch. "Bradley's been drinking heavily and telling anyone who'll listen that you're probably sharing more than cooking duties with Marcus," Jake reported grimly. "It's ugly talk that could damage your reputation and cause problems for the Wheeler family." Emma felt sick as she realized how vulnerable her position truly was. Despite doing nothing improper, she could still be destroyed by malicious gossip and insinuation. In frontier society, a woman's reputation was fragile and easily shattered by rumors. "What can I do?" she asked helplessly. "I can't defend myself against lies, and I can't ask Mr. Wheeler to damage his own standing by supporting me." Jake was quiet for a long moment before speaking carefully. "There is one way to protect yourself and put an end to this kind of talk permanently." Emma looked at him questioningly, though she suspected what he was about to suggest. "Marry me." The words hung in the evening air like smoke from the cooking fire. Emma stared at Jake, hardly believing she had heard correctly. "I know this seems sudden," he continued, "but think about it practically. You need protection and security. I need a wife who understands ranch life and isn't afraid of hard work. We get along well, we respect each other, and we both care about this land and this way of life." Emma's mind raced through the implications of his proposal. Marriage to Jake would indeed solve her immediate problems, but it would also mean committing her life to a man she respected but wasn't certain she loved. Yet as she considered her alternatives, she realized that practical marriages were common in frontier communities, and many grew into deep partnerships over time. "What about Mr. Wheeler and the children?" she asked. "They're counting on me." "Marcus has been talking about remarrying himself," Jake admitted. "There's a widow in Denver he's been corresponding with. He wouldn't begrudge you a chance at happiness, especially if it meant his children could still see you regularly." That evening, Emma discussed the situation honestly with Wheeler, who proved to be even more understanding than Jake had predicted. He admitted that he had been considering proposing to Emma himself, but recognized that she and Jake had developed a connection that went beyond his own feelings. "I want you to be happy, Emma," he said kindly. "You've brought peace back to this house and given my children stability when they needed it most. If Jake Morrison is the man who can give you the life you deserve, then you have my blessing and my gratitude." 2 weeks later, Emma stood in the small church in Millfield wearing her best dress and holding a bouquet of wildflowers that Sarah and Tommy had picked for her. Jake waited at the altar in his finest clothes, looking nervous but determined. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with the Wheeler family and ranch hands from Circle M serving as witnesses. As they exchanged vows, Emma reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come west following false promises and deceptive letters, only to find genuine opportunity and authentic partnership with a man who had appeared when she most needed protection and guidance. After the ceremony, Jake lifted her onto his horse behind him for the ride to their new home, a comfortable cabin on his own land that bordered the Circle M ranch. Emma wrapped her arms around his waist and looked back once at the depot where her old life had ended and her new one had truly begun. "Any regrets?" Jake asked as they rode toward their future together. Emma considered the question seriously, thinking about Robert's false promises, Peterson's cruel employment, and the desperate uncertainty that had defined her first months in Colorado. Then, she looked ahead toward the mountains and vast grasslands that would be her home, with a good man who had offered her partnership instead of pretty lies. None at all, she answered, and meant it completely. The cabin Jake had prepared for them was small but well-built, with windows facing east toward the sunrise, and a garden plot ready for spring planting. As Emma crossed the threshold of her new home, she felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Missouri, a sense of belonging and permanence that came not from romantic fairy tales but from honest work, mutual respect, and the promise of building something real together in this beautiful, challenging country. That night, as she listened to the wind across the grasslands and Jake's steady breathing beside her, Emma finally threw away the letters from Robert that she had carried across 3 states. She no longer needed dreams built on deception when reality offered partnership, security, and the chance to create a life based on truth and shared purpose. The woman who had been left alone at the depot had found something far better than the false promises that had brought her west. She had found herself, and, in doing so, had discovered that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to exactly where you were meant to be. When he glanced her way, she quickly looked down at her sweeping, embarrassed to be caught staring. But something about his brief nod of acknowledgement felt respectful rather than dismissive, unlike the crude attention she had learned to expect from men in this town. "Afternoon, miss." His voice was low and courteous as he approached the store entrance. "Might I ask if Mr. Peterson has any wire fencing in stock?" Emma set aside her broom, grateful for an interaction that didn't involve inventory counting or dealing with Peterson's increasingly difficult temperament. "I believe so. What gauge are you looking for?" The cowboy's eyebrows raised slightly, apparently surprised that she understood his question. 12 gauge, if he has it. Need about 200 feet for pasture repair." She led him inside, where Peterson was busy with his account books. The older man looked up with his usual scowl, which deepened when he saw Emma bringing in a customer. "Miss Carter, I thought I made it clear that sweeping the steps is your responsibility, not socializing with every cowboy who rides through town." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, the stranger spoke up. "I beg your pardon, sir, but the lady was simply helping me locate supplies I need to purchase." She was being helpful, not social. Peterson's manner changed immediately upon realizing a sale might be involved. Of course. What can I help you find?" While Peterson showed the cowboy various wire options, Emma returned to her sweeping, but she couldn't help overhearing their conversation. The stranger asked intelligent questions about quality and pricing, clearly someone who understood ranching and wasn't easily fooled by salesmanship. His name was Jake Morrison, and he worked for the Circle M Ranch about 15 miles north of town. When he left with his purchases, Jake touched his hat brim in Emma's direction. "Thank you for your assistance, miss." Emma found herself thinking about the encounter throughout the rest of the day. There had been something reassuring about Jake Morrison's presence, a steadiness that contrasted sharply with the chaotic uncertainty that had defined her life since arriving in Millfield. Her situation at Peterson's store was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. The old man grew more demanding and critical each day, finding fault with her work and making it clear that he considered her presence an inconvenience rather than an asset. Her tiny room behind the store felt more like a prison with each passing night, and the meager meals he provided barely sustained her. Worse still, she had made no progress in locating Robert or discovering what had happened to him. She had discreetly asked around town, but nobody recognized his name or description. It seemed increasingly likely that she had been the victim of some cruel deception, though she couldn't understand why anyone would go to such elaborate lengths to lure a poor farm girl to Colorado. The second time she saw Jake Morrison, it was under much more troubling circumstances. She was walking back from Mrs. Murphy's boarding house, where she had been helping with laundry to earn a few extra cents, when she heard harsh voices from the alley behind the saloon. "Come on, sweetheart, don't be unfriendly. We just want to talk." Emma recognized the voice of Tom Bradley, one of the rougher cowboys who frequented the saloon and often made crude comments when she passed on the street. She quickened her pace, hoping to avoid whatever confrontation was developing, but the sound of a woman's frightened voice made her stop. Please, just let me go. I haven't done anything wrong. Against her better judgment, Emma crept closer to the alley entrance. She could see 3 men surrounding a young Mexican woman who worked at the hotel. The woman was clearly terrified, pressed against the alley wall with nowhere to run. Emma's heart raced as she realized she needed to get help, but the sheriff's office was 3 blocks away, and by the time she returned, anything might have happened. She was debating what to do when a familiar voice cut through the evening air. Gentlemen, the lady asked you to leave her alone. Jake Morrison stepped into the alley, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. His voice remained calm and polite, but there was unmistakable steel beneath the courtesy. Bradley turned, clearly annoyed at the interruption. This ain't your business, Morrison. We're just having a friendly conversation. Doesn't look very friendly from where I stand. Jake's eyes never left the 3 men. Maria, why don't you head back to the hotel? I'm sure Mrs. Henderson is wondering where you are. The young woman didn't need to be told twice. She hurried past Jake and out of the alley, casting him a grateful look. Bradley and his companions were left facing a man who, despite being outnumbered, seemed completely unintimidated. You got a problem with how we socialize in this town? Bradley's voice carried a threat. I got a problem with men who bother women who want to be left alone. Jake's response was matter of fact. Seems like common courtesy to me. The standoff lasted several tense moments before Bradley apparently decided the confrontation wasn't worth the risk. Come on, boys. Let's get that drink. As the 3 men retreated toward the saloon, Jake turned and noticed Emma standing at the alley entrance. She expected him to be angry at her for witnessing the confrontation, but instead he looked concerned. You shouldn't be walking alone after dark, miss. This part of town can be unpredictable. Emma felt embarrassed by her obvious fear and tried to compose herself. I was returning from Mrs. Murphy's place. I help with laundry there sometimes. That's quite a walk from Peterson's store. Let me escort you back safely. They walked together through the quiet streets, Jake keeping his horse's reins in one hand while maintaining a respectful distance. Emma found herself grateful for his presence and surprised by how easy he was to talk to. That was very brave, what you did back there, she said quietly. Wasn't brave, just necessary. Maria's a good woman trying to make an honest living. She doesn't deserve to be harassed by men who should know better. Emma glanced at him sideways, noting the genuine conviction in his voice. Not many men would have interfered. Then, not many men were raised right. Jake's tone suggested the conversation was making him uncomfortable. My mother taught me that how a man treats women says everything about his character. They reached Peterson's store, and Jake waited while Emma unlocked the back door that led to her small room. Thank you for walking with me. I feel much safer now. Happy to help. But, Miss Carter, if you don't mind me saying, you seem like a woman with troubles. If you ever need assistance with anything, the Circle M Ranch isn't that far from town. Any of the hands there can get a message to me. Emma was touched by the offer, though she couldn't imagine what circumstances might lead her to take him up on it. That's very kind of you, Mr. Morrison. After he rode away, Emma lay in her narrow bed thinking about the evening's events. Jake Morrison's intervention had revealed something important about his character, but it had also highlighted her own vulnerable position in Millfield. She was a woman alone in a rough frontier town, dependent on the questionable generosity of a difficult employer and surrounded by men who viewed her as either an inconvenience or a potential target. The next morning brought new complications. Peterson confronted her before the store even opened, his face red with anger. I heard you were seen walking with that Morrison fellow last night. I won't have my employee developing a reputation for loose behavior. Emma's temper flared. Mr. Morrison was kind enough to ensure I reached home safely after helping Mrs. Murphy with her laundry. There was nothing improper about our interaction. Don't take that tone with me, girl. You're in no position to be particular about your reputation. You're lucky I gave you work at all, considering how you arrived in town with some story about a fiancé nobody's ever heard of. The words stung because they contained uncomfortable truth. Emma's position in Millfield was precarious at best, and she couldn't afford to offend her only source of income and shelter, no matter how miserable Peterson made her life. I apologize if my actions reflected poorly on your establishment, she said stiffly. It won't happen again. But even as she spoke the words, Emma realized she was tired of apologizing for things that weren't wrong. She had done nothing shameful by accepting Jake's protection, and she was weary of being made to feel guilty for circumstances beyond her control. That afternoon, while Peterson was at the bank, Emma made a decision that surprised her with its boldness. She wrote a carefully worded letter explaining her situation and asking for advice about finding more suitable employment. Then, she walked to the post office and mailed it to Jake Morrison at the Circle M Ranch. She had no idea if he would respond or what he might suggest, but for the first time since arriving in Millfield, Emma felt like she was taking control of her own future rather than simply surviving whatever happened to her. The feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating. 3 days later, Jake's reply arrived at the general store, addressed to her in careful handwriting. Peterson handed it over with obvious curiosity and disapproval, but Emma waited until that evening to read it in the privacy of her small room. The letter was brief, but thoughtful. Jake wrote that the Circle M Ranch's owner, Mr. Marcus Wheeler, was a widower who had been struggling to manage his household since his wife's death 6 months earlier. The ranch was prosperous and well-managed, but Wheeler needed someone reliable to cook, manage domestic affairs, and help care for his 2 young children. The position would provide decent wages, comfortable accommodation, and respectable employment for a woman of good character. If Emma was interested, Jake suggested she could visit the ranch to meet Mr. Wheeler and discuss the arrangement. He would be happy to escort her there safely and bring her back to town if the situation didn't suit her needs. Emma read the letter 3 times, hardly daring to believe such an opportunity might be real. After weeks of uncertainty and growing desperation, Jake Morrison was offering her a chance at genuine independence and security. But accepting would mean trusting a man she barely knew and venturing even further from civilization into the Colorado wilderness. She folded the letter carefully and placed it with Robert's correspondence in her dresser drawer. Tomorrow, she would need to make a decision that could change everything about her future in this harsh but beautiful country. TLY $3.47 remaining after her long journey. One night would leave her with barely enough for a simple meal. But sleeping outdoors wasn't an option for a respectable woman alone. The walk to Murphy's boarding house took her through the heart of Millfield, a town that seemed to exist solely to serve the railroad, and surrounding ranches' wooden buildings lined the dusty main street, their paint faded by relentless sun and wind. The general store's windows displayed basic supplies, and she could hear the sounds of men's voices and piano music drifting from the saloon. Mrs. Murphy proved to be a stout Irish woman with kind eyes and no patience for foolishness. She looked Emma up and down, taking in her clean but travel-worn dress, her carefully pinned hair, and the exhaustion that couldn't be hidden behind proper posture. "You're not from around here, that's certain. What brings a young lady like yourself to our little corner of nowhere?" Emma explained her situation carefully, omitting the growing fear that Robert might not exist at all, or worse, that he had changed his mind about marriage and was avoiding her entirely. Mrs. Murphy listened without judgment, then quoted her price. $2 includes supper, breakfast, and a clean room upstairs. Bath is extra if you want one, but I suspect you might after traveling so far. Emma paid for one night, knowing she would need to find work immediately or face the terrifying prospect of being stranded without funds in a strange place. That evening, she sat in the modest dining room alongside railroad workers and ranch hands, trying to make her beef stew last as long as possible while listening to their conversations about local ranches and their owners. Nobody mentioned anyone named Robert. The room Mrs. Murphy provided was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and single window overlooking the street. Emma lay awake most of the night, staring at unfamiliar shadows on the ceiling and wondering what she would do when morning came. Sleep finally took her just before dawn, filled with dreams of empty train platforms and letters that dissolved into dust when she tried to read them. She woke to the sound of horses' hooves and men's voices in the street below. Through her window, she could see cowboys preparing for their day's work, checking saddles and supplies. The sight reminded her painfully of Robert's letters describing similar morning routines at his ranch. Downstairs, Mrs. Murphy served her a simple breakfast of eggs, bacon, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. "Sleep well?" she asked, though Emma's appearance clearly suggested otherwise. "Well enough. Mrs. Murphy, I wonder if you might know of work available for a woman in town? I have experience keeping house, cooking, and managing household accounts." The older woman's expression grew thoughtful. "Work's scarce for women here, especially respectable work. Most ladies in Millfield are married to ranchers or railroad men. There's teaching, but the school already has Miss Patterson, and she's been here 15 years. The general store might need help, but old Peterson's tight with his money." Emma felt her hopes fading like morning mist. Perhaps one of the ranches needs domestic help? Possibly, but that's dangerous territory for an unmarried woman. Ranch hands aren't known for their gentlemanly behavior, and being isolated so far from town. Mrs. Murphy shook her head. "I couldn't recommend it in good conscience." After breakfast, Emma walked back to the depot, clinging to fading hope that Robert might appear with a reasonable explanation for his absence. The morning train brought new passengers, but none of them knew her name or showed any recognition when she approached. Station Master Henderson found her sitting on her suitcase by noon, staring down the tracks as if she could will another train to appear. "Miss, I hate to pry, but you look like a woman with troubles. Sometimes talking helps." Emma's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. She told him everything. The letters, the promises, the journey that had consumed her last resources, and the growing certainty that she had been abandoned or deceived. Henderson listened with the patience of a man who had seen many travelers face disappointment. "I've been working this depot for 12 years, he said quietly. "I know most every rancher within 50 miles, and I can't recall meeting any Robert who matches your description. That doesn't mean he doesn't exist, but it's troubling." The words hit Emma like cold water. She had been so focused on Robert's delay that she hadn't seriously considered the possibility that he was entirely fictional. But sitting there in the harsh afternoon sun, surrounded by her meager belongings and dwindling options, the truth seemed unavoidable. "What does a woman do in such circumstances?" she asked, not really expecting an answer. Henderson was quiet for a long moment. "Depends on the woman. Some give up and take the next train back where they came from. Others find a way to make a new life where they landed. You strike me as the second type, if you don't mind me saying." Emma looked around at the rough frontier town, so different from the green Missouri farmland where she had grown up. Everything about this place was harsh and unforgiving, from the relentless sun to the dust that coated everything to the rough men who dominated its streets. But going back wasn't really an option anymore. That afternoon, she returned to the general store and approached Mr. Peterson directly about employment. He was a thin, severe man who looked at her with obvious skepticism. "I don't need help," he said flatly. "Business isn't good enough to pay wages." "I could work for room and board," Emma offered desperately. "I'm honest, hardworking, and I understand figures." Peterson's interest sharpened at the mention of accounting skills. "You can work with numbers? Read and write clearly?" "Yes, sir. I helped manage my father's farm accounts for several years before he died." After some negotiation, Peterson agreed to let her work in exchange for a small room behind the store and basic meals. The wages were minimal, but it would keep her off the street while she figured out her next steps. Emma accepted gratefully, knowing it was likely the best offer she would receive. She moved her few belongings to the tiny room that evening, barely larger than a closet but private and secure. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of the store and the street beyond, constant reminders that her life had taken an unexpected and frightening turn. As she unpacked her suitcase, Emma found the bundle of letters from Robert tied with a blue ribbon. She held them for a long time, remembering the hope and excitement she had felt reading his promises of love and partnership. Finally, she placed them in the bottom drawer of the small dresser, unsure whether she was saving them as evidence or simply couldn't bear to throw away her dreams just yet.